I didn't throw my resignation letter on his desk. There was no shouting match in the boardroom, no copying HR on a scathing email, no LinkedIn post about toxic workplaces. I simply closed my laptop at 3:18 a.m., that's 3:18 a.m., on the Tuesday before Christmas. I unpacked the overnight bag I'd kept under my desk for emergencies and walked away from 23 years of dedication. That dedication had just been valued at exactly $72,000, less than a kid who couldn't distinguish between generally accepted accounting principles and a TurboTax tutorial. My name is Richard Callahan. I'm 63 years old, and this is how I learned that sharing everything you know with someone half your age is the surest way to become invisible to the people who matter. The whole thing started innocently enough 2 years ago. Morrison and Associates, one of Toronto's oldest corporate tax firms, had hired this eager young woman, Emily Chen, fresh out of her master's in taxation from Queen's University, with a resume that sparkled with academic achievements and internships at Bay Street firms. She was 28, sharp as a tack, and spoke the language of modern finance. Her fluency made senior partners nod along, even when they didn't quite understand what digital tax optimization meant. She was the kind of person who could transform "we need to file these amendments" into "we should leverage strategic tax planning methodologies to optimize our compliance architecture." I'd been at Morrison and Associates since 1999, right after I'd completed my CPA designation, and spent 5 years at Revenue Canada. Working inside the tax system teaches you things no textbook ever will. You learn how auditors think, what triggers reviews, which deductions get scrutinized, and which ones sail through. That insider knowledge had served me well in private practice. Morrison wasn't the flashiest firm on Bay Street, but we were solid. We handled corporate tax returns for mid-sized manufacturers, real estate developers, and family-owned businesses. The kind of clients who valued accuracy over aggression, because a single mistake could cost them hundreds of thousands in penalties and interest. Our $42 million practice ran on relationships I'd built over 2 decades. It was based on a comprehensive understanding of Canadian tax law that I'd spent 23 years accumulating, updating, and occasionally cursing at during late-night filing marathons. The thing about corporate tax work is that it's not like doing personal returns or bookkeeping. When our work has errors, clients face CRA audits. When we miss filing deadlines, there are automatic penalties. When we get aggressive on questionable deductions, businesses can end up in tax court defending positions that cost them far more than they saved. There's no "we'll fix it next year" in corporate taxation. Mistakes compound with interest charges that bleed money from your client's bank account month after month. I'd worked my way up from junior tax preparer to senior tax director. Over those 23 years, I knew every nuance of corporate tax planning, every court case that set precedent, every CRA interpretation bulletin that changed how we handled specific situations. Most importantly, I knew why certain strategies worked for certain clients and failed spectacularly for others. That institutional knowledge isn't something you download from the CRA website. It comes from decades of relationship building with clients, from understanding their business models, from knowing which tax positions you can defend and which ones will get you dragged into a reassessment nightmare. Enter Emily Chen, tax strategy consultant. Impressive title for someone whose professional experience consisted of summer internships. Her first week, Gerald Morrison himself, our founding partner, asked me to bring her up to speed on our client base. "Show her the ropes, Richard," he said. "Help her understand how we do things here at Morrison." So I did. I spent hours with Emily, walking her through our most complex client files, explaining why we structured their affairs the way we did. Our manufacturing client needed careful attention to capital cost allowance schedules because their equipment depreciation was their largest tax shield. Our real estate developer required sophisticated understanding of joint venture structures because their projects often involved multiple investors. Our family business clients needed succession planning that balanced tax efficiency with keeping peace between siblings who didn't always see eye to eye. Emily was a quick study. I'll give her that. She asked intelligent questions, took meticulous notes, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the complexity of what we'd built over the years. She reminded me of myself when I was starting out, hungry for knowledge, wanting to make a real contribution. I genuinely enjoyed mentoring her. By April of that first year, something shifted. Emily started getting invited to senior partner meetings that I'd never attended despite my title. She started talking about modernization of tax planning services and leveraging technology for client engagement. She'd use phrases like building on decades of institutional expertise and implementing best practices from industry leaders. Corporate speak for, Richard taught me this, but I'm the one who will get credit for suggesting improvements. Don't misunderstand me. Emily was genuinely talented. She understood modern business strategy in ways that frankly left me behind. She could take my technical explanations about deferred tax liabilities and turn them into compelling presentations that made partners lean in and ask follow-up questions. She knew how to package tax planning recommendations in language that made clients feel they were getting cutting-edge advice. But there's a fundamental difference between understanding something well enough to present it and understanding it well enough to defend it when the CRA comes knocking 2 years later with questions. Emily lived in the first world. I lived in the second. By September, Emily was attending client strategy meetings. By January, she had her own budget for professional development. By the following April, partners were praising her innovative approach to traditional tax planning. All of it built on foundations I'd explained to her during those early mentoring sessions. I didn't mind initially. Training junior professionals was part of being a senior person. Watching someone you've trained succeed feels rewarding. Emily always credited collaboration with the tax team when presenting her recommendations. Technically accurate, diplomatically phrased. Then December arrived. The Monday before Christmas, Gerald Morrison sent a firm-wide email with the subject line, Investment in Excellence Retention Initiative. Corporate speak for, we're losing people to bigger firms and need to stop the hemorrhaging before year-end bonuses get calculated. He was scheduling individual calls to discuss competitive retention packages for essential personnel. The kind of language that sounds generous until you realize they're trying to lock you in before you start looking elsewhere. I should have read between the lines. The signs had been there for months. Our best estate planning lawyer had left for a boutique firm with a 40% raise. 2 promising associates had been recruited by one of the Big Four. Our most experienced tax manager had given notice the week before Thanksgiving. The Toronto tax market was incredibly competitive. Morrison was struggling to keep pace with larger firms that could offer better compensation and advancement opportunities. But I wasn't worried about my position. 23 years of client relationships, spotless track record with the CRA, personal connections with half the mid-size business owners in Toronto. I figured I was secure. After all, I was the person clients specifically requested when they had complicated situations. That confidence lasted exactly until Gerald called me on Wednesday afternoon to discuss my competitive retention package. Gerald called me first on Wednesday afternoon, which should have been my first warning. In professional services, when they have good news for you, They make you wait until Friday so you can't immediately shop the offer around. When they're about to disappoint you, they do it midweek so they have time to manage your reaction. Richard, he said, his video background showing the cherrywood paneling of his downtown office. I want to begin by expressing how much we value everything you bring to this firm. You've been absolutely instrumental to our reputation, particularly maintaining our client relationships through all these transitions. The pause that followed felt like dropping through ice into Lake Ontario in January. I'd been in enough difficult professional conversations to know that everything before the word, however, was just throat-clearing. We're pleased to offer you a retention bonus of $28,000, distributed over 8 months, contingent on a 2-year commitment agreement. $28,000. I stared at my screen trying to process the number. My first thought wasn't gratitude or appreciation. It was arithmetic. Cold, practical family financial arithmetic. My wife Margaret had just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's 6 months ago. Her medication costs ran us $800 a month, even with insurance coverage. We'd had to hire a part-time caregiver for 3 afternoons a week because her tremors made cooking and certain household tasks dangerous. That was another $200 monthly. Our daughter Sarah was working on her PhD in Vancouver. While we didn't pay her tuition, we'd been helping with her living expenses because PhD stipends barely cover rent in that city. That was another $1,000 a month. Our son Daniel had just started his own business. While we'd promised ourselves we wouldn't become a bank for our adult children, watching him struggle with startup costs while we had savings felt wrong. We'd loaned him $15,000 the previous month, $28,000 spread over 8 months, worked out to about $3,500 extra per month before taxes, maybe $2,400 take home. It would help, certainly, but it wouldn't fundamentally change our financial stress. It wouldn't make Margaret's medical expenses feel manageable. It wouldn't give me peace of mind about retirement savings that had been essentially frozen for 3 years because every extra dollar went toward family needs. I appreciate the offer, Gerald, I said carefully. Could I review the complete terms before responding? Of course. I'll have everything sent over this afternoon. Just let me know by Friday morning if you're ready to proceed. Certainly. After we disconnected, I sat in my home office, feeling oddly deflated. 23 years of exceptional client service, of being the person who could untangle the most complicated tax situations, of training junior staff and building the firm's reputation for technical excellence, of working weekends and holidays to meet Feely ng deadlines. And this was my value to Morrison & Associates, $28,000 to commit to 2 more years. I was still processing that feeling when Emily messaged me on our firm's internal chat an hour later. Richard, just finished my call with Gerald. They really stepped up. You should see this. She sent a screenshot, clear, unredacted, no attempt at discretion. She was probably excited and wanting to share good news with someone who'd understand the firm context, or possibly just thoughtless about how it might appear. $100,000. Same structure, 8-month distribution, same 2-year commitment requirement, but $100,000 instead of $28,000. That's a difference of $72,000, nearly 3 times what I'd been offered, more than my entire annual salary increase over the past 6 years combined. I read the screenshot 4 times, hoping I'd misunderstood something, hoping there was some explanation that would make it make sense. Different role, classifications perhaps, different market rates for strategy consultants versus technical directors. Something. Can you believe it? They really do recognize talent when they see it, Emily added in a follow-up message. I closed the chat without responding. I needed time to think. That evening, Margaret found me at the kitchen table with my notebook, working through numbers. Our monthly budget, Margaret's projected medical costs, retirement projections that assumed I'd work until 65, which was now only 2 years away. "How did your call with Gerald go?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me with her evening tea. Her left hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. One of the symptoms we were both still adjusting to. "They offered me a retention bonus." "Oh, that's wonderful. How much?" $28,000 spread over 8 months. Margaret nodded, doing the mental arithmetic I'd already done. "That'll help with some of the medical expenses." Emily got $100,000. She stopped mid-sip, set her cup down with deliberate care. Margaret had been married to me for 38 years. She understood the significance of that number without needing explanation. "The girl you've been training, the same one." We sat in silence for several minutes. Margaret has always been better at processing emotional information than me. Years of working as a social worker had taught her to see beneath the surface of situations. But this wasn't a complicated psychological puzzle. This was simple mathematics and a clear message about value. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I'm not certain yet." But that wasn't entirely accurate. Part of me already knew. Revenue Canada had taught me about fairness, about objective standards, about the importance of precedent and consistent application of rules. It had also taught me about recognizing when a system was fundamentally broken beyond repair. The next morning, I reviewed Emily's recent client presentations, the ones I'd helped her prepare. Leading tax optimization for modern businesses, implementing strategic planning frameworks, driving innovation in traditional practice areas. My technical knowledge, my client insights, my 23 years of institutional memory, all repackaged in millennial-friendly language that made partners nod approvingly. I also pulled my performance reviews from the past 5 years. Consistently exceptional, critical to client retention, prevents costly errors through meticulous attention to detail, invaluable institutional knowledge, go-to advisor for complex situations, invaluable institutional knowledge worth $28,000, presentation skills and fresh perspective worth $100,000. The mathematics was quite clear. Friday afternoon arrived faster than I wanted. The week before Christmas was always our highest stress period. Whitmore Manufacturing, our largest client, was facing a year-end tax crisis. They'd sold a major piece of equipment in November that triggered an unexpected capital gain, and the tax implications were complicated by previous claims they'd made for investment tax credits. I had 3 days to figure out the optimal tax treatment, everything running against December 31st filing deadlines with no margin for error. I'd handled every year-end crisis for Whitmore Manufacturing for the past 18 years, not because I was officially their only contact, but because I was the one person at Morrison who understood their complete tax history and could structure solutions that wouldn't create problems down the road. It had become an unspoken expectation. Richard will handle whatever comes up. Margaret kissed me good night at 11 p.m. "Try to get some rest," she said, her hand trembling slightly as she touched my shoulder. "You'll need energy for the weekend." "I will." At midnight, I got the first panicked email. David Whitmore, the company's CFO, had just realized that their November equipment sale might affect their eligibility for certain deductions they'd claimed earlier in the year. Not a disaster yet, but the kind of early warning that, if you catch it fast enough, can be resolved without anyone except the accountant losing sleep. By 1 a.m., the situation had deteriorated significantly. Emily had prepared a tax planning memo for Whitmore Manufacturing 3 months ago. Her strategic recommendations looked brilliant on paper. She'd identified several opportunities to accelerate deductions and defer income. the kind of aggressive tax planning that wins you praise from clients who see their tax bill shrink. The problem was that nobody had stress-tested her recommendations against all possible year-end scenarios. Emily's memo assumed that Whitmore's revenue would follow normal patterns, but businesses don't always cooperate with projections. The unexpected equipment sale, combined with Emily's earlier recommendations, had created a situation where Whitmore might lose $180,000 in small business deductions because they'd inadvertently pushed their income above the threshold. The tax savings from Emily's earlier advice would be completely wiped out. Plus, they'd owe an additional $40,000, a net negative outcome of $220,000. I had two realistic options. I could reverse some of Emily's earlier recommendations, which would require filing amendments to returns we'd already submitted and explaining to the client why our previous advice had been flawed, or I could find a creative restructuring solution that would preserve the earlier tax benefits while addressing the new situation. For 23 years, I'd chosen the right answer over the easy answer. Take the professional hit if necessary, but never let a client walk into an avoidable disaster. That's what senior tax professionals do. We absorb the complexity and the stress so clients can focus on running their businesses. My phone rang at 1:23 a.m. Gerald Morrison, his voice tight with concern. "Richard, David Whitmore just called me at home. He's extremely worried about this tax situation. What's happening?" I explained the situation, technical details, root cause analysis, potential solutions, estimated work required to resolve it. The same calm, methodical explanation I'd given countless times over the years. "How serious is this? Can it wait until after Christmas?" "It'll get significantly worse. If we don't address it before year-end, they'll face penalties and interest on top of the additional tax. We're looking at a potential $250,000 problem by the time everything's calculated." Emily mentioned this tax planning was supposed to save them money. Of course, she had probably took credit for the initial $60,000 in projected savings without mentioning that she'd never considered scenario planning for different year-end outcomes. The strategy works perfectly if their revenue stays within certain parameters. It creates problems when unexpected events occur. Can you fix this without the client knowing there was an issue? Not realistically. I'll need to explain why we're restructuring things, but I can frame it as proactive year-end optimization rather than correction of a planning error. Do whatever you need to do, but don't alarm David unnecessarily. He's already stressed enough about year-end. I spent the next 4 hours working through various restructuring scenarios, modeling different approaches, calculating the tax implications of each option. I found a solution that would work. It involved some creative use of partnership provisions and careful timing of transactions, but it would preserve most of the earlier tax savings while avoiding the threshold problem. Crisis averted with technical expertise that only came from decades of experience working through exactly these kinds of situations. Another successful save that would never make it into a performance review or partnership consideration. At 2:47 a.m., Emily sent me a message on the firm chat. "Heard there was some excitement with Whitmore tonight. You've got it under control." Like she was checking a sports score, casual, detached, completely disconnected from the 4 hours of intensive work I'd just done to fix the flawed planning strategy that she'd created. "Resolved," I replied. "Amazing. That's exactly what I told Gerald when he called that you'd take care of it. We make such a great team, Richard." "We." That word hit me like freezing rain. The collective "we" that claims shared responsibility for success while delegating the actual work to someone else. Emily had told Gerald that she would take care of the crisis, using the plural "we," to claim ownership of work she couldn't do, problems she couldn't solve, expertise she didn't possess. At 3:05 a.m., another email arrived. Different client-related issue. Emily's aggressive tax planning recommendations from earlier in the year were creating cascading problems for two other manufacturing clients who'd followed similar strategies. Both were facing potential threshold issues that could cost them tens of thousands in lost deductions. Same underlying problem. Brilliant strategy on paper that didn't account for real-world variability. I had the same two options as before. I could spend the weekend cleaning up multiple client situations caused by Emily's planning, or let the problems develop and force the firm to deal with the consequences in January when angry clients demanded explanations. I sat at my desk, looking at the emails, thinking about that chat message. "We make such a great team. I was thinking about performance reviews that praised my institutional knowledge while offering me $72,000 less than the person whose work I was fixing. I was thinking about 23 years of midnight phone calls and weekend work sessions and holiday coverage that had somehow been valued at $28,000. Revenue Canada had taught me about duty, about the tax system and the responsibility that comes with giving advice that affects people's financial lives, about protecting clients even when they don't know they need protection. But it also taught me about fairness, about recognizing when standards are applied inconsistently. When a system rewards appearance over substance, presentation skills over actual competence to deliver results, that system becomes unsustainable. I could fix these situations. I could spend the weekend restructuring 3 different client tax plans, implementing solutions, preventing problems that Emily's planning had created. I could work another 30 hours straight to clean up the consequences of her $100,000 strategic recommendations. And on Monday morning, she'd probably receive praise for her proactive client service, while I'd get another urgent file dropped on my desk. At 3:18 a.m., I made a different choice. I stood up from my desk, closed my laptop, packed the overnight bag I'd kept under my desk for years for exactly these kinds of emergencies, walked out of my home office, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in 23 years, I let someone else's problem remain someone else's problem. Margaret found me in the kitchen 2 hours later, sitting at the table with coffee, watching the early morning darkness through our window. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I walked away. She sat down beside me, still in her nightgown, her hands wrapped around her own coffee mug to minimize the trembling. 38 years of marriage, and she could read my face better than any financial statement. From the crisis, from all of it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Margaret understood the weight of that decision without needing details. She'd watched me take emergency calls during family dinners, seen me work through holidays and vacations, heard me explain complicated tax situations to clients who'd never thank me for preventing problems they'd never know existed. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "I don't know, but I'm finished fixing other people's mistakes for $28,000 while they get $100,000 for creating them." My phone was buzzing constantly in my office upstairs, email after email after email, the sound of situations deteriorating without their safety net. For the first time in years, that wasn't my responsibility anymore. By 9:00 a.m., Friday, my phone had logged 31 missed calls. The tax planning crisis had completely spiraled. Emily's recommendations had created threshold problems for 3 major clients simultaneously. Whitmore Manufacturing couldn't finalize their year-end restructuring without my specific knowledge of their tax history. The other 2 manufacturing clients were demanding immediate meetings to discuss their situations. Morrison and Associates' reputation for technical excellence was unraveling in real time. I made breakfast and read the Globe and Mail, while my phone continued vibrating on the counter. Margaret came downstairs at 9:30, moving carefully as she always did first thing in the morning, when her symptoms were strongest. "How bad is it?" she asked, nodding toward my constantly ringing phone. "Bad enough that they're calling every 5 minutes instead of trying to solve it themselves." She kissed me on the cheek. "You know, I support whatever decision you make." "I know. That means everything." At 10:17 a.m., Peter Westbrook, managing partner, called. I'd met Peter exactly twice in 23 years, both times during year-end partnership meetings where senior directors were invited to present client updates. He was the kind of executive who appeared when situations were already critical and needed immediate resolution. "Richard," he said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries, "we need you available immediately. This is a firm, critical situation." "I understand," I said. "How quickly can you resolve the client situations?" "I'm not working today." Silence long enough that I thought the call had disconnected. "This isn't about vacation requests, Richard. We have 3 major clients facing significant tax problems. Whitmore Manufacturing is threatening to move to another firm. We're looking at potential professional liability exposure." "Sounds quite serious. You should contact your tax strategy consultant. I understand she received a $100,000 retention bonus." Another pause. I could hear background noise, multiple conversations, urgency in voices, the sound of people scrambling. "Emily doesn't have your client history or technical depth. Then perhaps you should have considered that before allocating retention bonuses." Peter's voice shifted, became harder. "We need to discuss this Monday." "Of course," I said, and disconnected. By early afternoon, the crisis had escalated beyond tax planning. Whitmore Manufacturing had contacted 2 other firms about taking over their account. One of the other affected clients had filed a formal complaint about the quality of advice they'd received. Morrison and Associates, professional liability insurer, was asking pointed questions about our quality control procedures. Gerald Morrison called at 2:35 p.m. His voice was strained, exhausted. "Richard, we need to talk." "I'm listening. What would it take to get you back working on these files?" Finally, the question I'd been waiting for someone to ask for 23 years. Compensation that reflects actual value rather than fashionable credentials. Recognition that 23 years of experience in client relationships have worth. A structure that doesn't punish competence while rewarding appealing presentations. I can't authorize compensation changes over a holiday weekend. "Then it sounds like you have a holiday weekend problem." I disconnected and turned off my phone. Saturday morning, Margaret and I went to our grandson's Christmas concert. Normal family activities. It felt wonderful to sit in the school gymnasium, listening to 7-year-olds sing carols off-key, not thinking about tax thresholds or client crises or the chaos I'd left behind. For the first time in months, I wasn't mentally running through complex tax scenarios or worrying about filing deadlines. Sunday afternoon, I turned my phone back on. 63 missed calls, messages from colleagues asking if I was all right, an email from HR requesting an urgent meeting first thing Monday morning, and one message from a number I didn't recognize. "Richard, this is Catherine Beaumont from Thornhill Advisory Group. I got your name from James Peterson, who used to work with you at Morrison. We're building a corporate tax practice and looking for a senior director who actually knows what they're doing. Would you be interested in a conversation?" James had been one of our best tax managers before he'd left for better opportunities 8 months ago. He was a sharp professional who'd gotten tired of watching less experienced people get promoted based on presentation skills rather than technical competence. I called Catherine back. Thornhill Advisory Group was a $65 million mid-sized firm looking to expand their corporate tax services properly. They needed someone with deep client relationships and technical expertise to lead a team of 4 professionals, someone who understood both traditional tax planning and modern client service expectations. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Catherine knew my reputation in the Toronto tax community and had heard about my work from multiple sources. More importantly, she understood the value of experience and hands-on technical expertise. She was the kind of leader who'd built her own practice from the ground up and knew the difference between impressive presentations and actual ability to deliver results. Monday morning, I submitted my resignation to Morrison and Associates via email, effective immediately. I'd already accepted Thornhill's offer, a 35% salary increase, a $20,000 signing bonus, and equity participation in the firm starting immediately. Most importantly, it was a firm that valued experience alongside innovation. "You're making a serious mistake," Peter said when I called to confirm my resignation. "I made the mistake 23 years ago," I replied. "I'm correcting it now." The aftermath at Morrison was swift and predictable. Emily worked through the entire Christmas week and probably learned more about practical tax planning in those 7 days than in her previous 2 years. But you can't replace 23 years of client relationships and technical knowledge in a week. Whitmore Manufacturing moved their business to another firm, taking $280,000 in annual fees with them. The 2 other affected clients negotiated fee reductions and demanded involvement from senior partners on all future planning. The retention bonus program was quietly suspended pending review of its effectiveness. Gerald Morrison took early retirement. That's corporate speak for being forced out before causing more damage. Peter survived, but his authority was significantly reduced. Emily lasted 9 more months. She wasn't incompetent, just inexperienced and overconfident in strategies she'd learned from textbooks rather than real-world application. She's at one of the big 4 firms now, probably working on large corporate files where her mistakes can be absorbed by multiple layers of review. I've been at Thornhill for 11 months. Last month, they made me equity partner and director of tax services. My team has grown to 7 professionals. We're building a corporate tax practice the right way, combining technical excellence with genuine client service, respecting traditional approaches while incorporating modern efficiencies. The difference is leadership that understands value. Catherine knows exactly why I was hired. My team knows their expertise is respected, and their development is taken seriously. When we develop tax strategies, we test them against multiple scenarios. When problems arise, we fix them properly instead of applying superficial solutions. Margaret's Parkinson's is progressing slowly, which the doctors say is the best we could hope for. The medication costs are manageable now. We've hired full-time help for the afternoons, and Margaret actually enjoys having someone to talk to while I'm at work. Sarah successfully defended her dissertation last month. Daniel's business is turning profitable. The financial stress of managing family needs while approaching retirement is real, but much more manageable now. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed at Morrison, if I'd accepted that $28,000 retention bonus and continued fixing other people's mistakes while they received credit and compensation. I probably would have worked myself into a heart attack or stroke while watching less competent people get promoted above me. Instead, I learned something valuable about loyalty and professional worth. Loyalty requires reciprocity to have meaning. A firm that values your contributions at $28,000 while paying someone else $100,000 for recycling your expertise isn't an organization that deserves your best efforts. Walking away at 3:18 a.m. wasn't about ego or revenge. It was about finally understanding my professional value, and refusing to accept anything less. The most important career decision you can make is recognizing when to stop solving other people's problems at your own expense. Your experience has genuine value, and any organization that doesn't recognize that value doesn't deserve your dedication. In professional services, they'll use you up completely if you let them. The key is knowing when to say, enough is enough. At 63, I finally learned that lesson. I only wish I'd learned it sooner. But perhaps some lessons only make sense when you've lived long enough to see the patterns clearly. That's the wisdom that comes with experience.